Imagine when a criminal becomes so popular that their evil deeds cannot be erased from history. I mean, these notorious criminals have committed heinous crimes. From genocide to money laundering, these are the worst criminals as we traveled across different continents. Number 9 will surprise you, because despite his atrocities, he never saw the prison. Now, pay close attention. Number 1, Pablo Escobar, South America. This is the drug lord himself. The name alone gets more searches on Google than some government officials. Pablo Escobar is referred to as the king of cocaine. In the 1980s and early 1990s, he was a drug lord from Colombia who held absolute power over the criminal underground. He began life in poverty in 1949 in Rio Negro, Colombia, yet he rose from his lowly origins to become one of the richest and most feared individuals on the planet. Actually, the source of his immense fortune was his leadership over the Medellin cartel, which was accountable for smuggling in around 80% of the cocaine that flooded American streets during his rule. Blood and violence served as the cornerstones of Escobar's empire as he used brutal methods to keep control of the drug trade and gave orders to kill anyone who got in his way. His crimes went far beyond drug trafficking. In an attempt to hold on to power and avoid justice, he was connected to the killings of several people, including judges, police officers, politicians, and civilians. With this, it was so clear that his actions cannot be overlooked. So Escobar's downfall started in the early 1990s, when the Colombian government stepped up its efforts to apprehend him with U.S. assistance. His empire began to fall apart after years of living in luxury and solitude while dodging the law and having his important allies slain or taken prisoner. The ironic thing is that, despite being apprehended in 1991, Escobar consented to turn himself in on the condition that he be permitted to construct La Catedral, his own prison. In reality, this purported jail served as more of an opulent resort where Escobar carried on with his cartel activities. But after his actions at La Catedral came to light, the government chose to move him to a regular prison. He still escaped, resulting in a 16-month manhunt that culminated on December 2nd, 1993, when the Colombian National Police murdered him in a rooftop gunfight in Medellin. Number 2, Ted Bundy, North America. We can't talk about notorious and serial killers in American history without mentioning Ted Bundy. People say Ted Bundy was the epitome of the charming psychopath. He was born in Burlington, Vermont in 1946. He was a man living 2 lives. The outside world saw an attractive, intellectual, and charming man, while the inner man was aggressive and menacing. He left a path of misery and devastation in his wake by murdering people in numerous states across the country in the 1970s. Bundy was a skilled manipulator who used his charm and good looks to entice his victims, mostly young, attractive women, into perilous circumstances where he harassed, overpowered, and even killed them. He acknowledged 30 killings, though the true total is likely greater. Bundy's actions were alarming not simply because they were so heinous, but also because he evaded capture for so long. He used many names and regularly changed his look as one of his many escape strategies. The fact that his accusations were spread across multiple states made it impossible for law officials to piece together the evidence and decide that they were dealing with a single suspect. Bundy was able to avoid the police for an extended period of time because to his intelligence and meticulous planning. However, his ego and hubris eventually doomed him. The truth about Ted Bundy being a serial killer wasn't made public until several years after his initial arrest in Utah in 1975 following an attempted abduction. Although Bundy was imprisoned, he managed to elude the authorities. This did happen once, but twice. In 1977, he made his first escape out of a Colorado courthouse by jumping out of a second-story window. He ran for many days before being apprehended again. The second escape took place in a jail cell in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, in December of the same year. This time, Bundy evaded detection for several weeks before making his way to Tallahassee, Florida, where he executed his most infamous and final murders at the Chi Omega sorority home. He violently attacked 2 of the 4 women before killing Kimberly Leach, who was 12 years old. Bundy's arrest in Florida signaled the formal beginning of his collapse. Bundy was found guilty and condemned to death following an exciting trial that established the term serial killer and drew national attention. Because of Bundy's heinous actions, charisma, and charm, the media became engrossed in his trials. Bundy was simultaneously fascinating and repellent. Despite his self-representation in court and use of legal knowledge to influence the system, justice was ultimately served. One of the most heinous chapters in American criminal history came to an end on January 24, 1989, when Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Number 3. Jack the Ripper, Europe. Jack the Ripper was very good at hiding his identity for quite a long time. He was recognized as an elusive serial murderer who terrorized the streets of London's Whitechapel region in 1888, leaving a legacy of horror, intrigue, and mystery that continues to this day. The funny part is that we still don't know who he is, as his genuine identity is unknown, making him one of history's most iconic and intriguing villains. His operations originated in the criminal and destitute Whitechapel neighborhood. He mostly targeted vulnerable women, especially prostitutes, whom he would ruthlessly kill and dismember in the dim, misty lanes of Victorian-era London. The populace was startled by the killing's extreme brutality, which sent a chill through the city. Following Mary Ann Nichols' death in August 1888, the murders of Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly signaled the beginning of the Ripper's reign of terror. Every murder was more horrible than the last, and the perpetrator's unnerving mastery of anatomy raised the possibility of his being a butcher. The terror and perplexity were only heightened by the Ripper's systematic strategy and ability to avoid capture. Now this is the interesting part. Despite numerous investigations over the years, Jack the Ripper was never caught, and the case remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in criminal history. Well, you could say technology has not yet developed to catch him then, but do you think he would be captured with the tech we have today? Let's move on to the next one. Number 4. Idi Amin, Africa. This is one of the most brutal war criminals in African history. Ugandans will never forget the kind of torture and horrible things that happened during Idi Amin regime. Amin was a military commander who led a coup in 1971. His dictatorship was characterized by utter anarchy and bloodshed. Indeed, it is thought that he may have killed as many as 300,000 people, a startling figure considering the scope of his ethnic cleansing and political repression. Amin's government gained notoriety for its massive persecution of people deemed to be enemies, arbitrary executions, and use of torture. His peculiar brand of extravagant self-promotion mixed with unpredictable conduct throughout his leadership, further destabilizing a country already in trouble. Amin violated human rights, and the world found it difficult to confront him because of his unpredictable actions and blustery speeches, which frequently left other nations unsure of how to react. His actions resulted in rampant corruption, poor administration, and the deportation of the Asian minority, who had previously been essential to Uganda's economy, which caused the country's economy to collapse under his watch. Amin left in 1979 after being toppled by a coalition of Tanzanian forces and exiled Ugandans. He escaped to Saudi Arabia, where he remained in exile until his death in 2003, after first fleeing to Libya. You might not want to hear this. Unfortunately, Amin was never held responsible for his acts, despite the widespread evidence of his crimes and the international outrage. Number 5. Al Capone, North America. When it comes to organized crime, we can't forget to mention Al Capone. Capone rose to fame during the U.S. Prohibition era when it was forbidden to sell or distribute alcohol. Taking advantage of this prohibition, Capone built a massive and extraordinarily successful criminal operation centered on prostitutes, illegal gambling, and bootlegging. Apart from financial offenses, he was connected to several violent crimes, such as the notorious 1929 St. Valentine's Day massacre that culminated in the horrifying death of 7 members of an opposing gang. Al Capone's business was incredibly profitable, but because of how well hidden his illegal activities were, law enforcement eventually learned about them, making it impossible to prosecute him of more serious crimes. Rather, he was found guilty of tax evasion in 1931 by the authorities. This case changed the game in the fight against organized crime, by demonstrating that financial crimes might be used to dismantle criminal networks. Owing to his sentence, Capone spent the rest of his criminal career behind bars at the notorious Alcatraz prison. Al Capone's life and criminal career ended as a result of his syphilis, which had been bothering him for years, and his failing health. He spent his final years in relative seclusion at his house in Florida after being released from prison in 1939. His illness-related difficulties led to his death in 1947. Capping a stormy chapter in American criminal history. Number 6. Pedro Lopez, South America. Pedro Lopez is known as the Monster of the Andes because he was prolific at killing. Although Lopez's early life and psychological makeup help to explain some of his actions, they do not excuse them. His violent habits may have been influenced by the severe trauma and torture he experienced as a child, according to numerous researchers. Ecuador, Peru, and Colombia were among the South American nations where Lopez reigned terror. He confessed to sexually abusing and killing over 300 young girls. This startling statistic emphasizes the horrifying extent of his crimes. Lopez's methods were very methodical. He would often prey on innocent young girls, robbing them of their freedom and torture them until they died. He became a terrible icon of violence due to his ability to avoid capture for an extended period of time, and his reign of terror caused fear and panic throughout the region. Lopez was captured when he was held in Ecuador in 1980. When the full scope of his crimes became known, the world was rocked by the revelations of his wrongdoings. Lopez committed horrific crimes, but his case took a worrying turn when he was given a 14-year prison sentence. Given the gravity of his actions, such sentence is actually rather light. The fact that the justice system did not punish him for his conduct outraged people throughout South America and beyond. His early release from prison and short prison sentence fueled public anger and revealed grave flaws in the way the legal system treated serial killers. Number 7. Ivan Milat, Australia. Aussie serial killer Ivan Milat gained notoriety as the backpacker murderer. He preyed on young backpackers passing through New South Wales between the late 1980s and the early 1990s, when his reign of terror came to an end. Offering rides to his victims, Milat enticed them into the deep woodlands, where he carried out heinous acts of brutality. Australia's reputation as a safe holiday destination was severely damaged by his shocking acts. Because of the public's intense terror of what might be hiding in the bush, the severity of his killings left a permanent mark on the country. Police conducted a thorough investigation for several years before finally apprehending Milat in 1994. Using personal items that the victims had in his possession, law enforcement officers painstakingly gathered up evidence connecting him to the killings. Although his apprehension was a source of comfort for the terrified country, the populace was nevertheless troubled by the truth of his misdeeds. Despite a mountain of evidence against him, Milat expressed no regret during his trial and insisted on his innocence. That he would never be free to hurt anyone again was guaranteed when he was given a life sentence without the chance of release. Number 8. Thug Behram, Asia. In the 19th century, many people in India were terrified of Thug Behram. Behram led the infamous Thuggee cult and is said to have killed over 900 individuals in a ritualistic manner. Garroting victims was a common manner of death used by the enigmatic Thuggee organization, who engaged in highway robbery and murder. One of the Thuggee's most active members, Behram came to represent the deadly and all-encompassing impact of the group throughout India. The dread and mystery surrounding him and his followers were heightened by the fact that his crimes were carried out in the name of religious ceremonies. A broad crackdown on the Thuggee cult was initiated by the British colonial authorities when they became concerned about the group's growth and lethal customs. This campaign ultimately resulted in Behram's capture, which signaled the beginning of the Thuggee's demise. The British, who viewed the Thuggee's suppression as a means of enforcing law and order in the area, considered his arrest as a major achievement. In 1840, Behram was put to death, using his passing as a cautionary tale to deter future followers of his path. Nonetheless, the myth of Thug Behram persisted, marking a sinister period in India's illicit past. the immediate victims of Behram's cult were not the only ones affected by his atrocities. His actions influenced the British government's decision to implement strict regulations and reforms meant to put an end to these kinds of illegal activity. The Thuggee and Dacoity Suppression Acts were put into effect to make sure that organized crime of this kind would never again be able to establish itself in India. These regulations established the basis for contemporary criminal law in India and marked a sea change in the colonial administration's response to crime. Number 9. Issei Sagawa, Asia. Sagawa was a Japanese student studying in Paris in 1981 when he killed and ate René Hartevelt, a classmate. Sagawa planned the murder because he had dreams about cannibalism for a long time and thought Hartevelt would be the ideal victim. He shot her and then proceeded to mutilate and devour portions of her body, an act that shocked the entire globe upon its discovery. When Sagawa tried to dispose of the remains in a park, he was discovered, which resulted in his arrest and the discovery of his horrific crime. When Sagawa was deemed legally insane by French authorities, his case took an unexpected turn, and he was unable to stand trial. The Japanese court system decided that he was not mad and did not need to be hospitalized, so he was deported there. Despite having admitted to his crime, Sagawa was free because of a legal loophole. The public was incensed over the verdict in both France and Japan, finding it hard to believe that someone as deadly as this could be free. Following Sagawa's release, conversations concerning international law and the difficulties of prosecuting crimes committed overseas took center stage. After his crime, Sagawa's life was still characterized by his sinister tendencies because he openly discussed them in public. He never really got away from the shame that followed him and spent the rest of his life living under the shadow of his crime. His life had been characterized by one horrible deed, but concerns about justice, mental health, and the boundaries of the judicial system remain unanswered in the wake of his death in 2022. Number 10. Hush Puppy, Africa. Born under the name Ramon Olorunwa Abbas, he was a social media influencer from Nigeria who led an extravagant lifestyle supported by one of the most advanced cybercrime networks in history. Hush Puppy, who flaunted his money on social media, gained notoriety for his opulent lifestyle, which included pricey automobiles, designer clothing, and lavish parties. But behind this flashy appearance was a dark reality. Hush Puppy was heavily embroiled in a number of cybercrime operations, such as business email compromise, BEC, frauds, which preyed on businesses and people all over the world. Being one of the most sought-after cybercriminals globally, his operations were not only extensive but also extremely well-structured. But Hush Puppy's downfall started in 2020 after he was apprehended by officials in Dubai during a dramatic raid. Several law enforcement organizations were involved in the operation, which turned up evidence connecting him to hundreds of millions of dollars in pilfered money. Hush Puppy was charged with fraud, money laundering, and other cybercrimes after being arrested and extradited to the U.S. Being one of the most successful and elusive cybercriminals working at the time, his arrest caused a stir in the cybercrime community. Due to Hush Puppy's actions, which had an influence on several victims ranging from tiny businesses to major corporations, his crimes had an international effect. His case made the sophisticated techniques employed by cybercriminals more widely known, as well as the significance of international collaboration in the investigation and prosecution of these offenders. Since the court case against him marked a major breakthrough in the war on cybercrime, it was widely followed. Hush Puppy ultimately entered a guilty plea to several crimes, so entering into a lengthy prison sentence and having to pay significant restitution to his victims. The severity of cybercrime and the extent to which offenders will go to take advantage of the digital age are made abundantly evident by his case. Now, some of you might be pissed off why some of these criminals never saw the four corners of jail. I'm too. But which of these stories captivates you the most? Let's hear from you. Hit the subscribe button for more crime videos.